Hi everyone, I'm Cynthia Treen, and welcome to my channel.
Today, we'll be talking about stuffing my felt animal designs. In my opinion, all felt animals have a special charm. I love both beginner and polished. This reindeer was my first childhood foray into felt animal making, and I still get a kick out of it. My little reindeer didn't need fancy stuffing techniques, and your creations don't either. But if you want to refine your animals, learning how to stuff firmly will make a big difference. In my basic techniques video, I cover strong seams and lots of finessing details so you can build a sturdy shell that will hold up to firm stuffing where you need it most. The good news is, if your seam shows signs of weakness or splitting, oftentimes they can be creatively repaired from the outside. So I'll cover that right at the end. I use 100% wool fiber for stuffing. It has a wonderful loft and compression without being slippery or overly springy like synthetic fiber. And I prefer, when possible, to work with biodegradable materials. For years, I only used a bamboo skewer as a stuffing tool. Their blunt ends have a bit of texture, which helps to grab the fiber and direct it into place. With a little twist, the fiber winds around the skewer's end just enough to accurately direct it into place. If you want an upgrade or just love new tools, a stuffing fork's slim shaft and pronged end work like a dream to direct stuffing exactly where you want it, without the finesse needed for a skewer. You might have seen me using one in my tutorials. I make these by hand, but they sell out almost immediately, and it's hard to keep them in stock. So now I'm working with a local woodturner to help produce the handles so I can have them available regularly. So keep an eye out for those in the months ahead. Many makers also swear by forceps for stuffing. They have a skinny long handle and a locking mechanism that holds the stuffing as you slip it into place. They're really cool. But I'm so used to my skewers and stuffing forks that I never seem to reach for them. That said, so many people have shared with me their love of this tool that I couldn't leave them out as a resource for new makers. Okay, enough about tools. Let's take a look at a few animals to see where they're firmly stuffed and more softly filled. This is my classic Felix fox. All the animals with this basic body style get the same stuffing treatment. Firmly stuffed heads and softer torsos. These animals are usually styled with clothing, so if their torsos are overstuffed, the outfits will be snug. I like to think of their middles as marshmallow soft, but maybe that's just my sweet tooth talking. On animals without garments, torsos and heads are both firmly stuffed, like my duckling, baby penguin, Nessie Lagoon, and my bears. Limbs, in general, are a bit slimmer and usually wired in some way. So follow the specific instructions for the animal you're making and don't overdo it with stuffing on the arms and legs. Before we begin stuffing, let's take a look at an example of a fully packed bear head next to one in progress. The finished tan head is full and round and weighs about 7.7 grams, while this one is slimmer and weighs 5.9 grams right now. Of course, you don't have to weigh the heads. I started doing this to know the fiber quantities for my kits, but I think it's useful to see how much fiber can fit into a strong shell. What I like about firm stuffing and rounder heads is that the eyes can be nicely indented without the heads collapsing. And roundness is cute. I think it's instinct that makes us drawn to small, slightly plump creatures. When stuffing, take your time, adding small wisps one by one. Fill the nose first. Then work on the center core, gradually building it up. Avoid large bunches, as they often stretch the opening, and I've found an aggressive approach often results in a lumpier finish. It's hard to say exactly how large a wisp is or should be, but I hope by watching this, you'll get a better idea of what I'm talking about. To fill uniformly, rotate the head as you add fiber. Notice the twist of the skewer. I give it a little spin each time I push forward, and it grabs the fiber, directing it into place. Check the head regularly as you work, filling evenly to maintain balance. Now I'm beginning to slip fiber between the core and the felt skin without stressing the seams. See how the skewer can move between the skin and the core without distorting the edge of the neck hole? The head is filling out, but it's still slim from side to side. Although the head is filling, it's still soft enough to add directly into the core. Now let's switch to the stuffing fork so you can see that in action. Its pronged end grabs the fiber with no need for a twist like we did with the skewer. One technique is to shimmy back and forth, easing the fiber between the core and the skin. Another is to snag small sections of the wisp, gradually slipping it beneath the skin. You can also use the stuffing fork to wind and gather fibers, directing them into place. I realize this is a little bit slow here, but I think it's helpful to see the process in real time for a bit. Feel free to skip forward if you don't need to see this. It looks like I need a bit more fiber here to balance out this side. Off camera, I've done a bit more stuffing on our bear head and brought the fox head up to speed. At this point in the process, you might be thinking, am I done yet? How can I possibly add more stuffing? But you can. You'll need a small pair of scissors with a sharp tip. These spring-loaded Fiskars are my favorites. Their blades are super sharp and will cut right up to their nicely pointed end. What you want to do is snip up into the core fibers, creating a path for more stuffing. By adding stuffing into this scissor channel, the shape will uniformly expand from its center. Enlarging in this way is less stressful on the seams, as the expansion pressure is evenly distributed, with no individual seam experiencing direct pressure from the tool. After filling one channel, you can make others and add more fiber as needed. This technique allows you to access even the hardest to reach spots late in the stuffing process. If you find a gap on the surface, you can channel up towards it and fill the depression. As you're going along, happily stuffing and rotating, you might pause and think, why the long face? Or the wide one? Not to worry, we can manipulate that too. If the head looks too long from front to back, give it a squeeze in that direction to redistribute the stuffing into the sides of the head. If it's too wide, squeeze it from side to side to push fiber into the front and the back. When you're nearly finished, add stuffing as needed around the edges of the neck hole. By pinching the edge of the neck hole, you can create small gaps and sneak in a bit more without stretching the opening. If you have a felting needle, you can use it to wrangle stray fibers and flatten any bulgy bits of stuffing coming out of the neck hole. If you haven't used one of these before, here are the basics. These needles have small scales on their shafts that manually tangle and felt wool fibers. You can get them in different shaft shapes for various effects, like star, triangle, spiral, and reverse. For this application, I use a 38 star or triangle, which is a good universal size. The needles are made from hardened steel, which makes their barbs and ends very sharp, but also brittle. As you use them, push in and out at the same angle so they don't break. It's good to have a few on hand just in case. If you get into artistic needle felting, you'll become more familiar with shapes, sizes, and their uses, but that's a discussion for another tutorial. Let's take a brief detour from stuffing to one of my favorite finishing techniques. To disguise seams on felt creations, use a needle to scratch over them, lifting the fibers into a soft halo. This is great for beginners still refining their stitches, but will also elevate the final finish of any animal you make. After lifting the fibers, heat your iron to high and give the seams a nice press. By pressing firmly, you can also soften and disguise visible lumps if you have any. Then finish off with a spritz of hairspray to set the surface. Keep in mind that being overly aggressive with this technique can weaken the seams. If you have weak seams to begin with, let's take a look at another technique to strengthen them. Thread a needle with a single strand of floss and knot one end. Then hide the starting knot beneath the felt surface. You can refer to my basic techniques tutorial for more on needle threading, knots, and the basic stitches I use in my patterns. What I'm doing now is called a fell stitch. It's a strong stitch often used to attach linings and garments, and can also be used for applique. On this panda, I'm strengthening the connection between the gray and the white felt. I stitch parallel to the seam, inserting the needle below the surface, coming up to catch the gray edge. I enter again into the white, skimming the gray, perpendicular to the edge. Then make my next stitch forward, catching the gray edge again. I can repeat this stitch all the way around to strengthen the entire length of the seam. Here's another great trick for strengthening or disguising seams. Use a pin to break up the fibers at the edge of a scrap piece of felt. I'm using gray again to work on the panda's torso seam, but you could use white to disguise the center head seam if you needed it. Once you have some loose fiber, use your felting needle to adhere it to the surface. With this method, I can straighten this bicolor seam and strengthen or disguise a center seam, side seam, or dart. You could also get creative with this technique and use it for fur patches or spots on an animal you're making. Just as we did with the fiber lifting, you should press and finish this off with hairspray. Wherever you are with experience, I hope these stuffing and finishing techniques help refine your current creation and all those that follow. I'll cover more of my favorites in future techniques tutorials. To my wonderful Patreon friends who make these videos possible, thank you so much for your patience as I create these breakaway tutorials. These will be great references and help our entire group get up to speed and enjoy making felt animals even more. Okay folks, that's it for today. Stay tuned for more felt stitching techniques and tutorials. If you like this video, you know what to do and how to follow. If you'd like to visit my Etsy shop, join my Patreon group, or support my tutorials with a one-time tip on Buy Me a Coffee, you'll find links to those and all my socials in the post via my Linktree. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, happy stitching.